Once, Pier 1 Imports was one of America's most recognizable home furnishing retailers. From a small California store in 1962, it grew into a nationwide retail giant with hundreds of locations and billions in sales. Customers loved its unique furniture, decorations, and imported products. But behind the colorful stores, serious problems were growing. Online shopping changed consumer behavior, powerful competitors took market share, sales declined, and financial pressure increased. Then, in 2020, bankruptcy and the COVID-19 pandemic pushed the company toward its final collapse. So, how did a beloved American retail icon go from incredible growth to closing its stores? This is the story of Pier 1 Imports. Pier 1 Imports was once one of the most recognizable home furnishing retailers in the United States. For generations of American shoppers, its stores were associated with colorful furniture, unusual decorations, candles, baskets, imported accessories, seasonal merchandise, and an atmosphere that felt different from ordinary department stores. The company built its identity around products inspired by different cultures and parts of the world, giving customers the feeling that they could bring something exotic and distinctive into their homes. For decades, Pier 1 successfully occupied a special position in American retail. It was neither simply a furniture store nor a conventional department store. Instead, it created a specialty shopping experience built around discovery. Yet the same company that had survived for almost 6 decades eventually found itself unable to survive the dramatic transformation of American retail. By 2020, Pier 1 Imports had filed for bankruptcy, announced the liquidation of its physical store business, and closed its remaining U.S. stores. Its downfall was not caused by one single mistake. It was the result of years of changing consumer tastes, increasing competition, the rise of e-commerce, declining sales, a large physical store network, financial pressure, and finally the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The story of Pier 1 began in 1962, at a time when America was experiencing major cultural and economic changes. The company traces its origins to a single store in San Mateo, California. According to Pier 1's own historical account, the original store catered to the post-World War II baby boomer generation, selling products such as beanbag chairs, love beads, and incense. This was very different from the traditional American retail model of the period. Rather than focusing entirely on conservative household goods, the business recognized that a younger generation wanted products that expressed individuality, international influences, and a more relaxed lifestyle. The company therefore developed an identity around imported merchandise and unconventional products. What started as a single location would eventually become a major national retailer. The origins were also connected to Charles D. Tandy and Luther Henderson, who were associated with Tandy Corporation. They provided financing to the California-based Cost Plus Imports chain in exchange for franchise rights. The first franchise location opened in San Mateo in 1962. During the following years, the concept expanded rapidly. By 1966, the franchise operation had grown to 16 locations across California and Texas, and the stores were rebranded under the name Pier 1 Imports. The company eventually established its corporate headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas, alongside another important Tandy holding, Radio Shack. This connection helped give Pier 1 access to a larger corporate infrastructure while it developed its own retail identity. The name Pier 1 Imports itself reflected the company's original concept. The word imports was important because the business differentiated itself through products sourced from outside the United States. At a time when many American retailers offered relatively conventional merchandise, Pier 1 attempted to make shopping feel like exploration. Customers might enter a store looking for a simple decoration and discover furniture, baskets, lamps, candles, textiles or other unusual products. The company learned that the experience of finding something unexpected could itself become part of the brand. This strategy helped Pier 1 create a loyal customer base and distinguish itself from larger mass-market competitors. During the 1960s and early 1970s, Pier 1 expanded from its California roots into broader American retail company. The growth was significant enough that the company went public on the American Stock Exchange in 1970. It later moved to the New York Stock Exchange in 1972. At that stage, Pier 1 had grown to 123 stores and had experienced substantial sales growth for several consecutive years. The company was no longer simply a small specialty retailer. It was becoming a national brand with ambitions beyond the United States. The company's growth during this period demonstrated the strength of its business concept. Pier 1 was selling something that larger retailers often struggled to reproduce: personality. A customer visiting a Pier 1 store did not necessarily know exactly what they were going to find. Merchandise changed frequently, and products were often presented as distinctive discoveries rather than ordinary commodities. This gave the stores an almost treasure hunt quality. The company's strategy was particularly attractive to shoppers who wanted their homes to look different from their neighbors' homes. Pier 1's expansion continued throughout the 1970s. International ambitions also became part of the company's growth story. The retailer opened stores outside the United States, including operations in Australia and Europe. Its domestic network continued to increase as well. One particularly important milestone came in 1979, when a Pier 1 store in Royal Oak, Michigan, became the first location to generate $1 million in annual sales. That achievement demonstrated how far the company had moved from its origins as a single store in California. By the middle of the 1980s, Pier 1 had established itself as an important specialty retailer. In 1985, the company made significant changes that reshaped its image. Rather than being perceived primarily as a retailer of counterculture-inspired imported merchandise, Pier 1 increasingly positioned itself around quality home furnishings and decorative accessories. The transformation was important because the American consumer market was changing. Customers were increasingly interested in decorating their homes, and Pier 1 wanted to become a destination for those shoppers. By 1985, the chain had grown to approximately 265 stores, with management discussing plans to double that number by 1998. The company was clearly in expansion mode. Its stores were becoming larger and more sophisticated, and its merchandise mix was evolving from youthful products associated with its earliest years toward furniture, home accessories, and decorative goods. The company was effectively turning its original idea of imported discoveries into a large-scale furniture business. This transformation was one of Pier 1's greatest successes. The company understood that its original customers were growing quickly. The young shoppers who had once purchased beanbag chairs and counterculture merchandise were entering adulthood, starting families, and buying homes. Instead of abandoning these customers, Pier 1 attempted to grow with them. The company moved from a youthful lifestyle retailer toward a home decor brand. That evolution helped it remain relevant for decades. The basic Pier 1 business model was relatively straightforward. The company imported merchandise from countries around the world and sold it through its own stores. Products included decorative accessories, furniture, candles, housewares, gifts, and seasonal merchandise. The company relied heavily on its ability to identify interesting products, source them internationally, and present them attractively in stores. This model worked particularly well when consumers enjoyed visiting shopping centers and malls as part of their normal shopping routine. But retail environments do not remain unchanged forever.
I'm in the plates and dishes, and over here, sitting right on top, is what looks like a piece of hand-painted Mexican Talavera pottery. Let's turn it over and see if it's signed.
Hello everyone, it's Tiffany with Thrifting Vegas. I shop at thrift stores, estate sales, garage sales, and discount stores for items I can resell for profit on online platforms like eBay, Poshmark, and OfferUp.
Potentially display thousands of products without maintaining hundreds of large retail locations. During the 1990s, Pier 1 continued to expand and experiment internationally. The company had operations in Japan during the late 1990s and early 2000s, although the Japanese presence eventually contracted. The international experiments demonstrated the company's willingness to expand beyond its traditional markets, but the most important market remained North America.
Let's look over at the sign to see the new color of the day. It is green. All green tags are 50% off, and we will make our way back to the hard goods section.
It also introduced a new advertising campaign designed to reinforce the sensory and experiential nature of the brand.
Vintage and of value.
The company even used celebrity spokesperson
Many
Kirstie Alley
companies,
during this
such
period.
as Blanco,
Launching an online store was an important step, but the transformation of retail was happening much faster than many traditional retailers anticipated.
Glass pieces,
Companies
and
such as
over
Amazon
time,
were changing
many of
consumer
those
expectations
wore off.
about convenience,
So
price,
in order to
selection,
recognize
and
those pieces,
consumers were becoming
unfortunately,
accustomed to
you
researching
just have to
products
know
online,
the look,
comparing
the
prices,
weight,
and
the
eventually
feel of
purchasing
the
without
item,
entering a physical
or
store.
you have to be familiar
Home
with their
furnishings, once
catalog
heavily
and
dependent on
pieces.
physical shopping,
Here
were
we
also
are in
gradually
the hard
moving into the
goods, and
digital
I
environment.
immediately spotted
Pier
something
1
I want a
nevertheless
closer
remained
look
a major
at.
physical
It is
retailer.
this piece.
Its stores
From
were
a
central
distance,
to its
it
identity.
looked like blue
The company
Delft,
believed that customers
but,
wanted to
as
touch
I
furniture,
pick it up and I
see
feel
colors
the
in person,
quality,
and
I
experience the
realize
atmosphere
that
of the
it
store.
is a florist
That
piece.
was true for many shoppers,
It's not
but it did not
marked on the
eliminate the
bottom,
growing importance of
so
online
we will
competition.
leave that on the shelf.
The challenge was not simply that consumers were buying products online.
Here we are in the
bigger
mugs.
problem was
I
that
wanted to
online
come here
competitors were
first to
changing what
see
customers
if the
considered normal.
cups to my
The
teapot
company
are still
celebrated its
here.
40th anniversary
Here they
in
are.
2002,
They're not candle
promoting the
holders.
theme from
They
hippie
are
to hip.
little teacups.
2 years later,
They're only
in 2004,
69 cents.
Pier 1 introduced
There are
another
two
marketing
here
campaign
at the
emphasizing its
front,
globally
and I
inspired
spy
merchandise and
one
distinctive
at the
shopping
very back
experience.
there.
These campaigns demonstrated that management understood
There
the
it
importance
is.
of brand
we
identity.
will have a look
Pier 1
around
was not
to
trying
see
to
if
become
we can
another
see
generic furniture
any
chain.
more.
It wanted to remain
Not
a
sure
unique
whether
specialty
there was
retailer.
originally a set
However,
of 4
the American
or 6
retail
of
environment was
these.
becoming increasingly competitive.
But
Big
at a
box
glance,
retailers
I'm
offered
only
inexpensive
seeing
furniture and
these
home
3.
accessories. Department stores carried
Pop them
increasingly
in the
broad home
cart.
collections. Specialty furniture chains competed
Lots
for
and
the
lots
same
of
customers.
mugs today.
Meanwhile, online marketplaces were creating an entirely new
At the
competitive
same
landscape.
time, we will
The 2008
look and
financial
see if we can
crisis
find
created
anything
another
else.
challenge
These
for Pier
are
1 and the
also
broader home furnishings
little
industry.
teacups.
When housing
Why
and
don't we
consumer
grab
confidence
these as
weakened,
well
people became more
and
cautious
see
about
if we can
discretionary
find
purchases.
the teapot that goes with
Furniture
these.
and decorative accessories were particularly vulnerable because consumers could postpone buying them. A family might need food and basic household supplies, but purchasing a new decorative lamp, table, or chair could easily wait.
Here
Pier 1
is
survived
a
the
really
financial
old
crisis, but
English
the retail
teacup,
industry was
possibly.
changing underneath it. Consumers were increasingly looking for value. They were becoming more comfortable
Quite a
purchasing
few
furniture and home
sets.
accessories from mass retailers and online
Here's
businesses.
a happy face mug.
Companies with strong digital platforms could reach consumers without the enormous physical footprint carried by traditional retailers. This was the environment in which
Here
Pier
is
1 entered the
another
2010s.
mug in the set.
The company still had an
I got
established
last
brand,
time.
thousands
This
of
one says,
employees,
"When
a
in
large
trouble,
customer base, and hundreds
delegate."
of stores.
I'm
In
not sure whether
2012,
that's
Pier
from a
1
famous
celebrated
movie
its 50th
too.
anniversary.
The other one
The company
I,
also launched a
got
redesigned
last
e-commerce-enabled website in July
is,
of that year.
If you want
Management
me, and then on
understood
the
that
back, on
customers
the
wanted
bottom
to
it
shop
says
when,
just
how,
whistle.
and where they wanted. This was a recognition
Oh,
of
look
the
at
emerging
this.
omni-channel
This
retail
is a
model.
Starbucks mug.
The customer no
It's
longer
a
needed
Year
to
of the
choose
Rat.
between online
Only
shopping and
99
store shopping.
cents, this one.
Successful retailers
That
increasingly
is a good
needed
find.
to provide
It
both.
looks to be brand
But simply
new.
having a website
We
was
will
not
pop
enough.
that in the cart as well.
Digital retail requires different capabilities from traditional retail. A company must
I
manage
just
online
spotted
search,
a
website performance,
SeaWorld
digital
mug
advertising,
here.
personalized recommendations, fast fulfillment, inventory accuracy, delivery logistics, returns, and customer service. It must also compete with businesses whose entire organizational structure is designed around e-commerce. Pier 1 stores continued to be the center of the business. This meant that the company had to carry the cost of a large physical network while simultaneously investing in its digital operations. That created a difficult financial balancing act. By the middle of the 2010s, the problems were becoming increasingly visible. Pier 1's sales performance weakened, and the company began closing stores. The company faced pressure from changing consumer tastes as well as competition from both traditional retailers and online businesses. Furniture shoppers had more options than ever before. Another problem was merchandise relevance. A retailer built around constantly changing trends must accurately predict what customers will want months in advance because products have to be sourced, shipped and distributed before they reach stores. If a retailer misjudges a trend, it can end up with large amounts of unwanted inventory. That inventory must then be discounted, which damages profit margins. Pier 1's international sourcing model also created complexity. The company directly imported merchandise from many countries. This gave Pier 1 access to distinctive products, but it also meant that its supply chain had to deal with shipping times, currency issues, tariffs, transportation costs, and inventory planning. A modern retailer needs a highly efficient supply chain because customers increasingly expect products to be available immediately. The company continued trying to reposition itself. Management experimented with new strategies, marketing and store optimization. But by the late 2010s, the underlying problems had become severe. In fiscal 2019, Pier 1 operated 973 stores in the United States and Canada, including 906 U.S. stores and 67 Canadian stores. The company generated approximately $1.6 billion in net sales, showing that it was still a very large retailer. Yet its scale did not translate into sustainable profitability. During fiscal 2019, the company had already closed 31 stores. Falling sales are particularly dangerous for a retailer with a large store network. A store has many costs that do not disappear simply because sales decline. Rent still has to be paid. Employees still need to be scheduled. Electricity, insurance, maintenance and logistics continue. If sales fall below a certain level, a store can move from being profitable to losing money very quickly. Pier 1 therefore began reducing its physical footprint. In January 2020, the company announced plans to close as many as 450 stores. This was an enormous reduction and showed how serious the situation had become. Then came one of the most consequential moments in the company's history. In February 2020, Pier 1 Imports filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the U.S. Bankruptcy Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. The company entered bankruptcy while pursuing a sale process and trying to restructure its business. Bankruptcy did not immediately mean that Pier 1 would disappear. Chapter 11 is generally designed to give a company an opportunity to reorganize, restructure obligations and potentially find a buyer.
If this is your
Pier
vibe,
1 hoped that a transaction or restructuring could preserve some or all of the business. But the timing could hardly have been worse. Only weeks after the bankruptcy filing, the COVID-19 pandemic dramatically disrupted American retail. Government restrictions and public health measures forced many physical stores to close temporarily. Pier 1 announced that its stores nationwide closed on March 22, 2020, while the company's corporate headquarters closed the following day. The online business continued operating during the shutdown. For a struggling retailer, this was devastating. Pier 1 was already dealing with declining sales, a large store footprint and bankruptcy. Suddenly, its physical stores were unavailable to customers across the country. The pandemic did not create all of Pier 1's problems. The company had been struggling before COVID-19. But the pandemic dramatically accelerated the crisis. The company had been trying to survive a long-term transformation in retail, and suddenly it faced an unprecedented short-term shock that eliminated much of the physical shopping activity
a table set
on which its
with
business
care.
depended.
Spaces that invite
In
you,
May 2020,
details
Pier 1
that speak
announced that it intended
without
to
a
pursue
word,
an orderly
made by
rundown
hand,
of its retail
felt
operations.
by heart. This
The company
is
sought
home.
bankruptcy court approval to sell inventory and remaining assets. This included intellectual property and the e-commerce business. The announcement effectively marked the end of the company's attempt to preserve its traditional retail store network. The announcement was devastating for employees, customers, and communities that had known Pier 1 stores for decades. Liquidation meant that furniture, decorations, candles, tableware and other merchandise would be sold at discounted prices. Stores that had once been designed around discovery and inspiration were transformed into liquidation centers. The history of Pier 1 therefore illustrates one of the most important lessons in modern American retail: a successful brand can survive only if its business model evolves with its customers. Pier 1's early success came from understanding cultural change. In the 1960s, it recognized a younger generation's desire for unusual products. In the 1980s, it successfully repositioned itself around home furnishings and decorative accessories. It continued to refresh its marketing and merchandise over the following decades. But eventually, the speed of change became greater than the company's ability to adapt. The rise of Amazon was particularly significant in changing consumer expectations. Amazon was not simply another retailer selling similar products. It changed how people thought about shopping. Consumers became accustomed to enormous selection, easy price comparison, customer reviews, home delivery and increasingly fast shipping. Traditional stores suddenly had to compete with a shopping experience that could happen from a customer's bedroom or smartphone. At the same time, Walmart, Target, HomeGoods, Wayfair and numerous other retailers expanded their home furnishing offerings. Consumers no longer needed to visit a specialty retailer to find attractive home decorations. They could compare dozens or hundreds of alternatives online. Pier 1's differentiation became harder to maintain because competitors could imitate its categories. A retailer might not be able to reproduce the exact Pier 1 experience, but it could sell decorative furniture, candles, baskets, pillows, lamps and accessories. Price competition also became increasingly important. Online shopping made it easy for consumers to compare prices. If a shopper saw an item in one store and suspected that it might be cheaper somewhere else, checking competitors required only a few seconds. This undermined one of the advantages that physical specialty retailers historically enjoyed. In the past, customers might visit several stores to compare products. Online, comparison became nearly instantaneous. Pier 1 store network was a major challenge. The company had hundreds of locations spread across the United States. During its growth years, this was an enormous competitive advantage. Stores placed the brand close to customers and created a physical shopping experience. But as consumers rapidly moved online, the same stores became expensive liabilities. A retailer cannot simply close stores without consequences. Lease agreements may extend for years. Employees must be managed. Inventory has to be moved. Store fixtures have to be removed. Customers must be redirected to other locations or online. Closing hundreds of stores is therefore a complex and expensive process. Pier 1's experience demonstrates the danger of confusing size with strength. At its height, having a huge store network made Pier 1 look powerful. Pier 1 did attempt to develop its e-commerce operation, but the challenge was enormous. Building a website is relatively easy compared with building a sophisticated digital retail ecosystem. Successful e-commerce requires accurate inventory systems, efficient warehouses, delivery infrastructure, digital marketing, data analytics and customer personalization. The company therefore found itself trying to compete in a digital world while still supporting a large physical infrastructure. That transition proved extremely difficult. There was also a broader shift in the economics of retail. Traditional retailers depended heavily on store traffic. Online retailers could operate with very different cost structures. As more customers shifted online, physical retailers had to spend more money on digital operations while receiving less traffic in their stores. Pier 1's story also shows why a company's final collapse often begins many years before bankruptcy. When Pier 1 filed for Chapter 11 in February 2020, the company had already been dealing with declining sales and strategic difficulties. The bankruptcy was therefore not the beginning of the crisis. It was the final stage of a much longer decline. The COVID-19 pandemic acted like an accelerant. It forced physical retailers into an extreme test at exactly the moment Pier 1 had the least financial flexibility. Imagine the situation facing the company in early 2020. It had declining sales, hundreds of stores, financial obligations, intense competition, a changing consumer base and an urgent need to invest in its digital business. Then physical stores across America suddenly had to close. For a healthy company, that would have been difficult. For a company already in bankruptcy, it was potentially fatal. Pier 1's failure therefore cannot fairly be explained by saying, COVID killed the company. COVID-19 was an important final blow, but the company was already in serious financial trouble. The SEC records show that Pier 1 entered Chapter 11 before the nationwide pandemic store closures. Nor is it accurate to say that Amazon alone destroyed Pier 1. Online competition was a major structural challenge, but the company faced many pressures simultaneously. Changing customer preferences, competition from other retailers, declining store traffic, merchandise and inventory challenges, high operating costs and financial pressure. The deeper lesson is that retail businesses must continually reinvent themselves. Pier 1 had reinvented itself successfully before. It moved from a counterculture-oriented import store toward a mainstream home furnishings retailer. It developed a national chain. It experimented internationally. It developed an online store. It refreshed its advertising. It attempted to modernize its operations. Pier 1 did attempt to develop its e-commerce operation, but the challenge was enormous. Building a website is relatively easy compared with building a sophisticated digital retail ecosystem. Successful e-commerce requires accurate inventory systems, efficient warehouses, delivery infrastructure, digital marketing, data analytics and customer personalization.
It starts with a feeling, a table set with care, spaces that invite you, details that speak without a word, made by hand, felt by heart.
There was also a broader
This
shift
is
in the
home.
economics of retail. Traditional retailers depended heavily on store traffic. Online retailers could operate with very different cost structures. As more customers shifted online, physical retailers had to spend more money on digital operations while receiving less traffic in their stores. Pier 1's story also shows why a company's final collapse often begins many years before bankruptcy. When Pier 1 filed for Chapter 11 in February 2020, the company had already been dealing with declining sales and strategic difficulties. The bankruptcy was therefore not the beginning of the crisis. It was the final stage of a much longer decline. The COVID-19 pandemic acted like an accelerant. It forced physical retailers into an extreme test at exactly the moment Pier 1 had the least financial flexibility. Imagine the situation facing the company in early 2020. It had declining sales, hundreds of stores, financial obligations, intense competition, a changing consumer base and an urgent need to invest in its digital business. Then physical stores across America suddenly had to close. For a healthy company, that would have been difficult. For a company already in bankruptcy, it was potentially fatal. Pier 1's failure therefore cannot fairly be explained by saying, COVID killed the company. COVID-19 was an important final blow, but the company was already in serious financial trouble. The SEC records show that Pier 1 entered Chapter 11 before the nationwide pandemic store closures. Nor is it accurate to say that Amazon alone destroyed Pier 1. Online competition was a major structural challenge, but the company faced many pressures simultaneously. Changing customer preferences, competition from other retailers, declining store traffic, merchandise and inventory challenges, high operating costs and financial pressure. The deeper lesson is that retail businesses must continually reinvent themselves. Pier 1 had reinvented itself successfully before. It moved from a counterculture-oriented import store toward a mainstream home furnishings retailer.